everybody. It's the Montessori Monster. Thanks for supporting the channel and being here. Let's talk about reading philosophy. I will not be able to cover everything here, and I am certainly not the all-knowing being on reading philosophy and teaching reading. But I do have a lot of experience, and I do have ideas to share that could be helpful to you, whether you be a parent of a beginning reader or a teacher. So I hope to be able to share some of that experience I have from teaching all of these years and working with a wide variety of children. So this is sort of some of the philosophy behind reading, and I kind of want to present some different ideas about it. So again, not trying to say I know exactly how to do everything, but kind of look at it from some different angles, I guess. Because it's really can feel kind of complex, and it's multifaceted, and it's not the same for everybody. So generally, at least in American education, people talk about several models of teaching reading, and they tend to talk about a whole language model or a phonics model. I sort of subscribe to the idea of the whole language model for the most part, because the whole language model actually includes phonics instruction. But I think that phonics instruction doesn't, it's not the only thing that you should do to help support children with their reading and writing. So there are great models online. You can look up different models for whole language. But basically the way I see it is that you have different parts of that whole language that all come together. If you can picture sort of almost like a bar graph, and those amounts of effort you put into the different things depend on the child and their needs. So for example, usually a very emergent, just starting to think about reading kind of child, you're probably going to lean in a little bit more into the phonics side of things. So maybe that part of your effort is much higher. Maybe that's 70 or 80% of what you do. But once a child is reading some, then that should start shifting pretty dramatically. You want to talk about expressive writing and nuance and building vocabulary and stuff like that. So again, it sort of depends on the child. Generally, the way I have taught, and I have found quite successful for almost everybody, has had children practicing spelling rules in sort of a phonics model, where they're learning a certain spelling rule, usually on a weekly basis. So they practice it throughout the week, and they see how well they know the rule by the end of the week, and then often those spelling rules are repeated sort of in a dovetail way in the curriculum, so that the children see them again maybe later in the year or in a different school year. And so they're doing that, but they also, of course, need to be practicing reading. And children famously like to try to read books that are too difficult for them. There's a lot of sort of status and insecurity around what kind of book you're reading in a school. So really, it would be nice if children, when they're just sort of free-form reading or doing silent sustained reading, it would be nice if they're reading books that are actually slightly below their decoding level. So if they're reading at, say, a middle of first grade decoding level reading, maybe beginning of first grade level books are good for them, because you want them to be building confidence and actually be reading practicing, seeing repetition, working on those sight words. If they're kind of getting close to their frustration level, then they're probably not going to read as much. They're maybe going to be distracted, and they maybe hit fatigue sooner. They're not going to read as much. So you want them to be kind of comfortable with what they're reading for fun. Sadly, too often I've heard of cases where families are pushing reading so much for children that they are providing books and encouraging books that are at that difficult level. And so children, people do all sorts of things that sort of can hurt the long-term sort of attitude towards reading for children, like charts on the wall where there's sort of this built-in reward system, or if you read 1 hour every day for a week, you get a prize, and things like that kind of could make a child, this is a very Montessori side of me speaking here, but it could make a child not be fully invested, where they're really going for the prize or the praise or whatever it is, and they're not really working at the reading in a genuine way. You want them to be intrinsically motivated to be doing that. So they should be working on spelling rules. You don't want them to just solely be working on, thinking about reading as something you just memorize. Certainly children do. We all learn to memorize words, but you want them to know and be practicing the idea that there's a reason behind all the rules. Speaking of that, I would not get into all the exceptions of rules for young children. I would say stick to the basic part of the rules, and then later, maybe when they're in 5th or 6th or 7th grade, they're learning some of these exceptions and that sort of thing. So children need to be reading, and they need to be reading a variety of books too. So they need to be reading nonfiction, and a big part of reading nonfiction in a classroom, I've found that works really well, is for children to be then writing about, basically using books as research sources. So they're writing about what they read. And the reason that tends to be so effective, it's a great way to check comprehension, but it sort of deepens the learning of the subject material. So for example, if a child is reading about lions, let's say, if they're able to read a book, understand the facts that they're reading, and then synthesize that, and then write it down in their own words, not just copying it, they write it in their own way, that is a great level of comprehension. Not only that, but from the teacher or the parent point of view, it's a great form of assessment. Are they able to paraphrase, get things in their own words? If so, then their level of comprehension is really in a good spot and will continue to just go up and up. If they're trying to copy everything and needing help with writing facts from nonfiction books and that sort of thing, then they probably need a lot more support. They're maybe doing a subject area that's too challenging, or their source materials are too hard. So really children should be trying to synthesize information like that in a sort of a research way with nonfiction books. They should also have exposure to literature, so they should be reading storybooks, fiction books, and then they should be sort of working with the comprehension and understanding of those stories in a couple different ways. One, they really should be discussing. They should be discussing with peers books. There's different types of learners. Howard Gardner had the multiple intelligences. So a verbal learner is going to learn a lot by discussing these books. Again, strengthening their comprehension of the book. They should be writing about the book. So they should be answering questions and sharing opinions about the book. There's something that is called Bloom's taxonomy that sort of breaks down the types of questions children should be exposed to. Usually, if you're a teacher, if you have a degree in elementary education or education overall, you probably have heard of Bloom's taxonomy, and you possibly, like myself, have even taken coursework on how to write questions and how to challenge children with different kinds of questions. So generally, questions that have how and why at the beginning of them tend to be higher level questions. Questions that can be answered with one fact or one statement are not as challenging. So if you're reading a story with children and you ask the question, where does the story take place? Great, good. We should learn about setting in stories. That's fine. But the answer might be, Washington, D.C. So a child could write an answer. They live in Washington, D.C. That's okay. If they're learning how to write a complete sentence, that is the correct answer. That's fine. But as children are getting older, and when they're ready for it, you want to be asking how and why kind of questions. How do the main characters solve the mystery? Well, okay, that probably can't be answered in one simple sentence. So a child's going to need to write a couple sentences. Maybe it's a paragraph. Maybe they're learning about topic sentences and other things as they get older. So that's good. When they're ready, there should be some how and why questions. So what I usually do for children is, depending on their age and what they're ready for, I start with those sort of lower level questions of Bloom's taxonomy. But when they're really confident with that and that seems a little easy, I start to kind of sneak in some how and why questions that make them think a little bit more deeply, so that over time they're getting closer to writing, paragraphs and sharing their opinions a lot more. So that sort of thing is great. Their relationship with literature is super important. Talking about it, writing about it, having back and forth with peers and with a teacher or an adult with a parent if you homeschool. So that's a whole nother level to sort of the reading, writing work that children do. And then I want to share another idea. I have endless ideas about this subject matter, but there's, you hear a lot in Montessori education, but maybe all education too, but that this is going to sound kind of counterintuitive, but that children learn to read by writing. It's almost like, so it's like the hand to the mind. And I know when I was learning about this in education that didn't sit right with me exactly. But the idea that by writing and trying to write, children get better and better at their reading skills. So I'm not sure if this is a perfect example, but it's kind of, it's getting pretty close. And that is that when children sometimes write real big, say in kindergarten or starting first grade, they write real big letters, or a lot of backwards letters. Totally natural, by the way, for children to have backwards letters and numbers. When they're doing that, their brain doesn't quite yet see the correct letters or word, but they're working on it, and as the more they do, that strengthens their reading ability. So if they probably know how to write their name. If they're 4 or 5, they probably know their name. Well, they write that. Once they write their name, many times, they're solid on their name. They not only writing it, but then they recognize it the rest of their lives. Any book, anywhere, any sign, any whatever they see their name, they will know it. The word the. That is a weird word. Why is it spelled like that? The. It doesn't totally make sense. And so, but it's so super common. So when they're writing the word the, and sometimes early on that might be copying, sometimes it's looking at a print material or a book. When they see the word the word the will start to stick in their mind as they practice writing it. To write THE many times means that they are memorizing that word, and that when they see it all these millions of times over their lifetime, they don't hardly have to think about it. Another sort of example would be spacing. Sometimes children write, they don't put spaces between their words. Well, really, that's okay, but really once they put the spaces between the words, their brain starts to separate and see each of the words. And as they work on spelling and getting better at those writing skills, if the spaces are there, their brain will start to memorize those words a lot more quickly, and their spelling will improve, and then their reading will improve, and their comprehension will improve. It all fits together. Because if all of their writing is all smashed together or wild and kind of a mess, then their brain is not getting that second part of that practice. It's still good for them to practice writing, but the next step is for them to write a little bit more neatly so that their brain gets used to seeing those sounds and those spellings. So the way that children write is important too. For me, in most of the U.S., I believe that most children are printing. Cursive seems to be going out of style in the U.S. I think large areas of Europe and other parts of the world cursive is done regularly. I prefer to teach both. I think it's good for children to learn how to print and do cursive. And sometimes for certain children, one works better than the other. And whatever works better for them is great, because you want children to be writing. And so that kind of leads into the next part of what I wanted to say here, is that you want children to be risk takers with their writing. If they feel shy about how an adult might view their writing, or a peer might, they start to write less and less. You want them to be expressive and to go for it. You'd rather see them making spelling mistakes when they're young, but trying to be expressive. So for example, if they're writing a story, you want them to try to put in those juicy words, those adjectives and adverbs and stuff as they get older, and to just go for it. If you as an adult is always hovering around them, correcting them on all their spelling and everything that they're doing, it's kind of human nature to sort of shut down and to stop writing as much. So it's kind of a delicate balance. You want to have higher and higher expectations of a child's writing and their spelling, but you also want to encourage their creativity and expressive writing. They'll write more, and they'll learn more, and the writing will get better. So again, it's child dependent, and you just want to, it's based on each child. So if you're a teacher of a classroom of say 25 children, that's the benefit of knowing them all, right? You can do what's best for each child for what they're on. if you know them all. And that's why there can't be a set standard for every child. You can't, it doesn't work well to say every first grader should be able to do this. Every third grader should be writing, this kind of paragraph. Some benchmarks are important, but because every child's different, they're working on different things at different points. So that's the great thing about an individualized curriculum that benefits all children. So learning to read is all of these facets. It's the writing, it's the reading, fiction, nonfiction. It's the type of ways that we process information, speaking, writing, with adults, with peers. All of those things go into that whole language picture. Now, like I said at the beginning of the video, sometimes it doesn't work exactly right. Sometimes a child struggles. You're doing all those things and they're exposed to print and, they're trying, you're trying, and it's not clicking. And that's when you can get into finding that sometimes children need extra support. Sometimes they have a reading difference and they need extra support from either you, the teacher, or a parent, or a specialist, somebody that can help them kind of get through those bumps. And so reading instruction actually gets very analytical. It's great. It's a beautiful thing, the science behind it. Usually you can do assessments that you can pinpoint what areas a child is missing or not understanding, and you can kind of fill in those gaps. Now, sometimes the brain is just wired differently, and a child's just going to need more support long term, and that's okay too. And you just jump in and start giving that support. So usually I would say by middle of second grade, you have a pretty good idea about that with children, if they have some sort of learning difference that is slowing them down. And then definitely by third grade, I'd say for sure you should have a pretty good idea. Sometimes you know those things earlier, kindergarten and first grade and that sort of thing, but maybe not quite as reliably. I know that sometimes teachers sort of jump to conclusions for a young child. I mean, Rudolf Steiner said, he is the founder of Waldorf education. He's basically, I'm sort of summarizing here. This is not the whole thing he said about this, but he said children shouldn't even be messing with trying to read until they're about 7. Well, I see some knowledge in that sort of thinking. In Waldorf education, children don't even really try it much, or it's completely organic if they do. So in a lot of our culture, we tend to rush and panic. Oh, my child's 5 and they're not really reading yet, and get upset and get worried. And we don't need to. It's okay. Well, they'll get it. You just have to work at it and sort of not become emotional about that process, but instead stay very analytical and scientific about it, and then it's a beautiful thing. There's all these wonderful ways to support children. So this is a very kind of basic talk through about reading philosophy. There's a lot more to it. I'm forgetting, major parts right now, that other things that we could talk about. And I hope on this channel we get to talk a lot more about reading instruction and reading philosophy, because there's a lot more to it. These are just some sort of umbrella type big picture thoughts about it. So, like I said too before, I'm not a total expert. I'm not sure any of us are. I just have my own experiences and know what has worked for me. So take everything you're hearing in this video and on the whole channel and use it in your own way. Think about the child or children you're working with and what would apply to them. And be okay to disregard and forget about some of the things I'm saying. It's totally okay. It should be a thoughtful, meaningful process, the idea of teaching reading to children. Thank you, everybody. I really appreciate the support on the channel, and seems like we're growing. So those of you who are here at the beginning, thank you so much. And everybody else who's jumping on board, let's do this. Let's create a meaningful, understandable curriculum on this channel. All right. Don't forget to like and subscribe.